In 1903, someone sent the owner of this saloon a disturbing letter.
So what do you think the son did? Of course, he read it. Read that his wife had slept around with some other men. He went upstairs to the residence, came back down with his gun, shot and killed Jane, and then shot and killed her.
Decades after the murders, there was another incident here. A man was arrested for abusing his grandmother inside of the home.
The lock is still on the outside of the door to keep her in the bedroom. This room is where the hidden brothel was.
So she was locked in this room.
She was locked in this room.
From the outside in.
From the outside.
I can't imagine the suffering.
These are the original floors.
We have some luminol with us.
Holy shit, I think you guys actually found the blood. Oh God, there's blood everywhere.
There's a lot of negative energy in the house.
God was calling me.
All my hair is on it.
Inside the room. Yeah, that's freaky.
Oh my God. Did you want to follow us over here? Shot.
Oh my God. Die.
Oh!
What the
How would that come from the room?
I ended up getting sleep paralysis, which I haven't had in mad long. And I used to supposed to sleep where the bed frame is behind me. Okay. But this time, since I was charging my phone, I slept where your feet would go. And I woke up and I couldn't move. So I was like, oh my God, I'm getting sleep paralysis. And I automatically knew what it was. So I started praying. But as I was praying, I saw and I felt like a big ass shadow engulfed the room. And the window turned red for some reason. Right? Once it turned red, I closed my eyes and I started praying even harder, and eventually it went away. But what it reminded me of, I don't know if you ever seen Monster House. Yeah. You remember the scene where DJ has a nightmare? Mm-hmm. It looked exactly like that, just without the shadow coming out of the window. The shadow was coming from where my door is at. And I used to be scared of that specific scene. But it looked exactly like the movie.
Nah, that sounds like, yo, I would fucking shit myself. Yo.
So just imagine that, but coming from the opposite of the room. But it was like an actual like shadow figure, not a hand.
Yo. That's mad fucking scary, bro.
I couldn't see no facial features, but
after being strapped to hundreds of helium-filled balloons, Father DeCarli, wearing a flight suit, helmet, GPS device, and radio, lifted off from the coastal city of Paranagua, Brazil. Smiling and waving at the crowd below, the beloved Catholic priest ascended towards the heavens on what he hoped would be a powerful gesture of faith and a creative way to raise funds for a roadside chapel serving truckers. But as he floated higher, the winds turned against him. Strong gusts blew him off course, carrying him far from shore and over the open Atlantic Ocean. Though he stayed in radio contact for a while, his messages grew panicked. He was cold, disoriented, and struggling to operate his GPS. Then, the line went dead. Massive search and rescue efforts were launched. Helicopters, boats, divers, and even satellite tracking were used in an attempt to find him. Weeks passed, nothing. Then, on July 4th, nearly 11 weeks after he vanished into the clouds, a grisly discovery was made. A group of rescue workers spotted something unusual floating near the coast of Bahia. It was the lower half of a human body, badly decomposed, still partially clothed in remnants of a flight suit. DNA tests would later confirm what many had feared. It was Father DeCarli. The upper portion of his body was never recovered. Many believe he was eaten by sharks or some other predator lurking below the ocean's surface.
This has to be one of my all-time most requested crime cases ever. This is the reality TV killer, Mick Philpott. It was the 11th of May 2012 at 18 Victory Road in Derbyshire. 6 children were sleeping soundly in their beds when all of a sudden a huge fire broke out. Now this fire was no ordinary fire. It almost felt like it just engulfed the whole house straight away. As smoke roared through the building, Mairead Philpott, the children's mother, rang emergency services. It seemed that the parents had been able to flee, but their dad Mick had apparently made heroic attempts to try and save the children. The dramatic scenes that unfolded almost felt like something out of an action film. It was like a theatrical spectacle that had been curated. And in a sick way, it had. But the consequences were deadly and very, very real. It wasn't long before the bodies of children inside the property were being carried out by emergency responders. Innocent little lives cut far too short. There was 5-year-old Jaden, 6-year-old Jesse, 8-year-old Jack, 9-year-old John, 10-year-old Jade, and 13-year-old Dwayne. 5 of them had died from smoke inhalation, and 1 was rushed to hospital and died at a later stage. And at first glances, you'd think Mick was a devastated dad. As the bodies were carried out by the responders, Mick actually had to be held back because he seemed so devastated. He was almost like lunging for his children's bodies. This appeared to just be a tragic accident, but the truth was soon revealed. Investigators quickly determined that this fire had been set intentionally, with petrol beneath the letterbox. And as the word started spreading about this horrific family tragedy, people started talking about Mick, the dad. It seemed his name was on everyone's lips. He was very notorious in the area. He was incredibly outspoken and provocative and had appeared on the infamous Jeremy Kyle show. He'd earned the nickname Shameless Mick and appeared on numerous TV shows over the years. He'd often brag about having 2 wives and was very obnoxious and aggressive on TV. It made people wonder, what's he like behind closed doors if this is what he's being like in public on national television? In fact, Mick had a very, very horrific and disturbing history. He'd been incredibly abusive towards women, including even attempted murder. He'd previously headbutted a female colleague, along with a sickening attack on a teenage girlfriend who had tried to break up with him. She was terrified of him as he'd previously not only broken her arm, but also dislocated her knee with a sledgehammer. And people always comment on my videos like, why do these women stay with these abusers? Well, because it usually gets much worse after they try and leave. And Mick did just that. When she said she was going to break up with him, he broke into her house, grabbed a knife, and stabbed her repeatedly in an attempt on her life. He then also turned the knife onto her mum. He was put in prison for this, but was then released, and his behaviour only escalated. And Mick was constantly having kids and not looking after them. He got married to his first wife but ran off with a 16-year-old girl. Bear in mind, this man was in his 40s at this point. He then ended up with Mairead, the mother of his deceased children. And after that horrific fire, they went on to do a press conference. Now, reporters were expecting, understandably, the Philpotts to sit there and ask for anybody with any information to come forward. You'd think that they would want to find whoever did this, whoever was responsible, and punish them. What the Philpotts actually did was just sit there thanking people. They didn't appeal at all for any information, and in fact Mick only asked one thing: to be left alone. Mick was kind of seen throughout the press conference holding this piece of scrunched up tissue. He was dabbing his eyes with it, but there were clearly no tears coming out. It almost seemed like a prop just to show that he was upset, because half the time he had it on his forehead. And it wasn't just this that was making police incredibly suspicious. Neighbours from across the road reported to police that they'd seen Mick during the fire outside pretending to cough, not rescue his kids. Police now had enough suspicions to try and set a trap to catch the Philpotts out. They were keeping them in a hotel because obviously the house had burnt down, but this was a great opportunity to try and get some evidence. They decided to bug the room that they were in. Shockingly, they caught Mick interrogating his wife about how convincing she'd been when she was lying to police. It also transpired that a friend of the pair, Paul Mosley, was also involved in the planning of this fire. Shortly after the tragedy, locals had also spotted Mick and his wife in a pub singing karaoke, dancing and getting drunk, which was incredibly strange for 2 people who'd just lost multiple children. Nurses had also reported how inappropriate Mick was in the hospital, where his son was fighting for his life on a life support machine. Now, this was just before his son passed away. Mick had been making inappropriate comments to nurses and trying to flirt with them. The true story of what had led to the horrific deaths is purely down to Mick Philpott wanting to seek revenge on an ex and gain financially. It transpired that in early 2012 he was desperate to get a bigger council house after one of his wives had left him and taken her 5 children. He seemingly wanted to do something to get back at her and set the fire to try and frame her. He had envisioned getting her into trouble with the authorities so that he could have custody of her children and therefore have a bigger council house. He also thought that he would be this brave hero and the world would love him. He set this fire with complete disregard for the children's safety, and they went through unimaginable suffering at the end of their short lives. The local community really kindly raised over £15,000 for the children's funerals, but Mick was really not that interested in this. He was more interested in auctioning off the teddy bears that had all been left at the front of the house. He wanted to keep the money and told one organiser, "Shut up and just get on with it." Mick got given life in prison and Mairead and Paul got just 17, and I believe that they're now both free.
At the beginning of this year, a 12-year-old boy was sent to Trails, Carolina, which is a troubled teen wilderness camp, and less than 24 hours later, he was killed. He was smothered to death after the counselors enclosed him in a bivvy, which is like a one-person camping tent. They're really small and typically have packed weights in them. On the evening of February 2nd, the boy, who's only been identified by his initials, CJH, was taken to the camp in Lake Toxaway after his parents paid for 2 strangers to take him from his home in New York. The camp states that they are a wilderness therapy program that serves kids with behavioral issues and those who have ADHD, autism, and PTSD. On his first night there, counselors stated that the boy was placed in a bivvy without incident. At this specific camp, the bivvies are placed on plastic sheets, and the sides are then folded up kind of like a canoe, so this is already dangerous. Bivvies include a breathable mesh inner layer that can be zipped, and an opaque waterproof outer layer that is basically a little door. Trails Carolina camp protocol requires that the top of the bivvies be covered with an alarm device that will alert the counselors if the kids try to get out. Well, the mesh on this little boy's bivvy was torn, so the counselors confined him in with a weather-resistant door, and then they put the alarm system on top of that door. It's important to note that bivvies typically come with a warning label that tells you not to close this outer layer all the way because it could cause breathing problems. So while the boy was inside, he was moving around a lot and making a lot of noise, so the counselors took him out. Once out, the boy was able to relax and fall asleep, but the counselors woke him up and forced him back inside the bivvy. The camp states that they could hear him moving around until 1 a.m., and then it went silent. The counselors reportedly did routine checks on the kids, but with the little boy's bivvy being closed all the way, they couldn't see inside. They just figured he was okay. But the next morning, they couldn't wake the boy, and when they opened the bivvy, they found him with his head in the enclosed corner of the bivvy and his feet at the opening of the door. He was found to only be wearing half of his clothes, so it suggested that he possibly suffered from hypothermia because of the construction of the sleeping area. It could have made him feel hotter than he was, but the counselors said that he was cold to the touch. They said they tried doing CPR, but it was too late. The autopsy states that his cause of death was asphyxiation due to smothering, and his manner of death is homicide. The medical examiner stated that the alarm placed on his bivvy and the plastic sheet surrounding it were factors that caused him to not be able to properly breathe. The report shows no sign of trauma or sexual assault, and there was no evidence of drugs or any natural causes that could have led to his death. He died as a direct result from being placed in a damaged bivvy by others with no way to get out. The camp has previously denied any responsibility and immediately after his death released a statement saying they were shattered and cooperating with authorities. They fully believe that this was accidental and even launched their own investigation into the boy's death. But the Transylvania County Sheriff's Office say that that's not entirely true and that the camp hasn't completely cooperated with them. The camp has since been shut down and had its license revoked. It's not clear if any charges will be filed, but authorities are conducting a criminal investigation into the boy's death. No arrests have been made, but police say that they do have suspects. These troubled teen wilderness camps need to all be shut down. In many cases, kids that are forced into these camps are abused physically and sexually and severely neglected. This little boy had ADHD, anxiety, and faced social challenges like making friends. I can't imagine his last moments and how terrified he must have been.
Actress Michelle Trachtenberg was found dead this morning in New York City, and tributes to her are already flooding across social media. It isn't known exactly how Michelle died, but it is known that she recently received a liver transplant, so people are hypothesizing that this could have had something to do with that. Michelle started her acting career at just 3 years old, appearing in commercials, and I definitely remember her starring in a number of shows and movies when I was younger, including shows like The Adventures of Pete and Pete and Harriet the Spy. Michelle also had prominent roles in shows like Gossip Girl and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and people all over the world loved the roles that she took on and the films and TV shows that she appeared in. Now, Michelle in the past had been pretty open about some of the abuse that she faced on the sets of TV shows and movies that she worked on, and I think that this news comes as a shock to a lot of people because, like I mentioned before, she was only 39 years old. Obviously, this is really sad news and my thoughts go out to her family, But if we find anything else out, I'll be sure to update everybody on here. And yeah, this is just really sad news.
You remember when you talked about La Blancanieves?
Yeah.
If you want to just give like a brief rundown of like where it was or like what it was.
It was kind of like a Disneyland, but in Mexico. But there was a lot of bad stuff that would happen in that specific spot, and it was all allegedly because it was built on top of a cemetery, like a graveyard. And it was this one specific statue, which is a Snow White statue.
Yep.
Of La Blancanieves, and she's cursed. So warning: if you don't want to see her, you don't have to.
She moves around and stuff. There's like footage of her like blinking. There's been a recent video of a guy who was around that area exploring it, and then he sees La Blancanieves move. Yeah, and they're pretty far, bro.
Is that walking on it by itself?
Yes. Then they run to it. Bro, I don't know. These are brave. I would not run to that.
Run to it, bro.
No digas mamadas, güey.
Nah, bro, that's crazy, bro. You see that, bro? We were just...
Three close friends decided to go for a hike one afternoon, something they often did together. They chose a trail not far from their neighborhood and set off, chatting and joking as they walked. About 45 minutes into the hike, one of the friends suddenly announced that he had to go home. Disappointed but understanding, the other two continued on, unaware of the dark turn their day was about to take. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the trail, the pair decided it was time to head back. But as they walked, an unsettling feeling crept over them, like eyes were following their every move. The faint sound of footsteps and crunching leaves echoed behind them. Fear took hold, and they quickened their pace, hoping to shake the eerie presence. Panic set in when the sound of footsteps grew closer. One of the boys tripped and fell hard, and as his friend rushed to help him, a masked figure emerged from the darkness, clutching a knife. Before either could react, the masked person grabbed the fallen boy and drove the blade into him repeatedly, blood soaking the ground as the friend watched in horror, frozen with fear. The attacker's gaze then shifted to the remaining friend. In an instant, the masked figure lunged forward and slashed his throat. Gasping for breath and clutching his bleeding neck, the boy collapsed. As his vision blurred, he watched the masked figure slowly remove the disguise. Beneath the mask was the face of their friend, the one who had claimed he needed to go home. A twisted grin spread across his lips as his friends died right in front of him.
In July of 2007, this entire family, who was part of a doomsday cult, mysteriously disappeared. Let's talk about it. So this is Simon Cadwell, his partner Chantel McDougall, their 5-year-old daughter Leela, and their friend Antonio Popic. Simon was an internet doomsday cult leader who published books about his beliefs, and he created a website called the Truth Fellowship. He had a pretty large following too. They all lived in a house on a remote property in a small town in Western Australia called Nannup. They disappeared in the summer of 2007 after telling friends and family that they were moving to Brazil to join a spiritual community because they felt that they didn't belong in modern society. But in the months leading up to their disappearance, Simon told a woman in his online cult forum that he was planning a peaceful family suicide pact, and after, Antonio would bury their bodies in bushes before killing himself in the wilderness so no one would find his body either. When the woman questioned why he would be okay with killing his young daughter, Simon backtracked and said that they would just move to an isolated area where no one could ever reach them. Those who knew Simon said he was strange and controlling and at the time was on antipsychotic medication. Those same people also said that Chantel and Antonio were brainwashed by him and would do anything he said. The beginning of this strange mystery starts in May of 2007 when Simon was pulled over while driving. Someone had tipped off the police stating that Simon wasn't who he said he was. And when police looked into this, they discovered that he had stolen a birth certificate from a former coworker and had stolen his identity. In all reality, Simon's real name was Gary Felton, and he had fooled everyone for the longest time. So during that traffic stop, police were questioning his driver's license, which made Simon panic. 2 months later, the entire family would vanish. Right before their disappearance, Simon and Chantel sold their cars for somewhat cheap, and Chantel cashed the check for that at the bank on July 13th. The next day, which was their last known sighting, Chantel met with a woman to sell her 2 of the family's pet dogs. The woman who bought the dogs was originally supposed to meet up with Chantel the next day, but when she called Chantel, Chantel said, quote, "No, you must come today." The woman said that Chantel appeared super anxious and that the entire encounter made her feel so uncomfortable. A few days later, their landlord went to their Nannup house, and it was an eerie scene. The house was spotless and all of their personal belongings were gone. The only thing left behind was half a bowl of rice and 2 notes, one from Antonio and one from Chantel, who said that the entire family moved to Brazil. They were reported missing sometime later, and what police found during their investigation only brings more questions. Just 2 days before they disappeared, a call was made from their Nannup home to Transwa, which is a public transportation company in Australia. Whoever called booked a bus ticket from Bridgetown to Northcliffe under the name of J. Roberts, but it was never used. But 2 tickets under that same name were used the morning of July 16th, one going from Perth to Kalgoorlie and one from Perth to Northcliffe. A passenger under the name of J. Roberts did get off at Northcliffe and someone did board a train to Kalgoorlie, but there's no evidence of anything after this. The day before, Antonio's phone traced to Perth and it was used to call a Domino's Pizza and a hotel. His driver's license was also used to check into a hostel in Northbridge. This was confirmed to be him, as the Domino's driver confirmed Antonio was the guy he delivered the pizza to that night. As the other 2 tickets were being used the morning of the 16th, Antonio called Transwa for reasons unknown, and then he too vanished off the face of the earth. The investigation wasn't handled properly and lots of things slipped under the rug, like how a woman's shirt that possibly belonged to Chantel was found in a field in Northcliffe 3 months after she disappeared. The person who found it said it smelled like rotting flesh. This lead wasn't investigated until 2015, 8 years later, and at this point, a wildfire had come through and burnt everything up. In 2011, a Gary Felton checked into a caravan park in King River, which is near Albany. Authorities hunted down every Gary Felton in the country, but nothing ever came of it. Chantel's family is currently trying to raise funds to launch a new investigation to find them. They've even created a GoFundMe to help. At this point, her family believes that Chantel and Leela are likely dead and buried somewhere in Western Australia. This case has left me with so many questions. Did the entire family move to Brazil like they said? Are they living off-grid under different names? Did they take their own lives, or were they possibly murdered? So many questions remain unanswered. Their bank accounts have not been touched since the day they disappeared. Whatever happened to this family remains a mystery 17 years later.
This is why I believe Madeleine McCann is still alive, and this case starts with a totally different missing girl before Madeleine was even born. JC Lee Dugard was born in Anaheim, California in 1980. She was a beautiful girl with golden blonde hair that she often wore in pigtails. Now, her family actually moved to Lake Tahoe in California because they thought that it was more safe than where they previously lived. They had a break-in at their old house, so they were understandably concerned. But in hindsight, this is incredibly chilling, as something far, far more tragic was about to happen at their new place. Now, JC had a bit of a strained relationship with her stepdad, Carl. JC kind of felt like he was always super negative towards her and kind of blamed her for things, and she also felt that he got in the way of her and her mum. So on the 10th of June 1991, she didn't want to ask him for a lift to school, so she headed on foot to the school bus. Now, as JC, who was only 11 at this time, approached the school bus stop, she noticed a car coming alongside her very slowly. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a hand reached out of the window and JC felt herself suddenly go numb. She had no idea she'd been tasered. She then woke up in the back of a stranger's car. The first thing she heard was a voice say to another person, "I can't believe we got away with it." She was then driven to their home. This was Philip and Nancy Garrido. She was taken back there, handcuffed, and was left locked in what I believe was like a little outhouse shed kind of situation. She was threatened that there was dogs. If she tried to escape, they would attack her. Meanwhile, JC's stepdad had actually witnessed the kidnapping and sprinted to call 911, but it was far too late. He was down as prime suspect. People just really suspected that it was actually him to blame, that maybe he'd done something to JC and he was lying about the whole kidnap thing. He was really villainized for a while, and it almost felt like he was the prime suspect and police weren't really looking at anyone else. But still, the local community was out in full force hunting for JC. Little did they know she was already hours away with these two terrible kidnappers. The married couple had actually met when Philip was in prison for a prior attack. He'd kidnapped a woman called Catherine Calloway and held her captive, repeatedly R-ing her. But he'd only served 10 years in prison of a 50-year sentence. He was then just free to kidnap JC. Horrifically, the same fate awaited the little 11-year-old. She was R-ed, she was repeatedly abused, in just a sickening, sickening way, and I go into a lot more detail on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation. So if you want a huge deep dive of this case, that is over there now. She was kept in a series of tents in the back garden and repeatedly awed by her kidnapper. And the inevitable happened. The 14-year-old gave birth. Now, I can't imagine going through not only all of the abuse that she did, but also then being made pregnant by your kidnapper and then having to give birth and be a mum at just 14 years old. Luckily, JC actually saw this as a positive. She finally had somebody who she could sort of confide in and love. She had a lot of love to give, and she was an incredible mum, despite only being a child herself. But it didn't stop there. The years and years went on, and JC's baby and herself remained in captivity in the garden. Then when she turned 17, another baby was born. Now, both babies were delivered at home by Philip and Nancy, who had literally just watched videos. They weren't medically trained at all. It is a miracle that both of these babies were born unharmed and healthy. The kidnappers made JC call herself Alyssa and pose as the baby's sister. They all called Nancy Mum. And they kind of all over the years started to go out and about into the local community a little bit more and take a few more risks. It was almost like as the years went on, they got more confident and they just thought that they were never going to be caught. Bear in mind, Philip was on parole from the previous prison stay. He had parole officers going into the house occasionally, and on some occasions they even saw JC and the babies and they didn't do anything. Philip and Nancy had cut JC's hair and dyed it so that she would be less recognizable. Poor JC just kind of got used to this new way of life and living in tents in the garden. She would homeschool her children too. But in the back of her mind, as she grew older, she was obviously aware that she was missing and she did have a family at home. She would kind of think to herself, I wonder if anybody is looking for me. And on one day in December 2003, she spotted herself on the news. It was a segment speculating about what must have happened to her. Now, bear in mind, this is about 12 years later. It must have been so wild for her to see this on the news. The reporters were talking about how it may have been a known killer who killed a girl called Polly Klaas, who also took and killed JC. But she was alive the whole time. She was just waiting to be rescued. It wasn't until 2009, 18 years after she was kidnapped, that there was a breakthrough. And it was all thanks to an officer called Ali Jacobs. As I said, Philip and the girls were kind of going out more frequently to things like Walmart and just to go and get their nails done, things like that. And finally, an officer called Ali Jacobs said that her woman's intuition just kicked in when she saw Philip with the little girls. The children were so pale and looked kind of emotionless and blank, so she ended up putting Philip's details into the computer system. When she saw his history, she just knew something wasn't right and she arrested him. But when JC was taken in for questioning, she was so scared to tell anyone the truth because she'd been conditioned to believe that she would be in trouble or she'd have her children taken away from her. So she kind of lied to try and cover for Philip. She really didn't want him to be arrested at this point. Thankfully, the police persevered and she eventually wrote down her real name. Police were finally able to call her mum at work and tell her, your daughter has been found. And she couldn't believe it. She screamed, my daughter's been found. JC and her mum were finally reunited, and I just can't imagine what that feeling must have been like. Quite bittersweet to know that obviously your daughter's going to be coming back, but also really tragic that the whole time she'd just been there waiting to be rescued. Philip and Nancy were thankfully jailed, Philip for 431 years and Nancy for 36. And I honestly think if JC Lee was just out there for all of those years, just living a completely different life, then the same could be said for Madeleine. As I said, for a huge deep dive, check out The Bourne Investigation. I've gone into loads more detail as I've read her book.
However, coined the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair. No one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
I died in my bath, electrocuted by my phone while on a video call with my best friend. My name is Maria Antonietta Cutillo, and I was from Italy. This all happened on the evening of May 3rd, 2023, when I was just 16 years old. I was on a call with Fabi, my best friend, talking and laughing together as we usually did. But suddenly I felt an indescribable pain and screamed my friend's name just before dying. My best friend, powerless to the scene and having seen everything, immediately contacted the emergency services. But it was already too late. I was dead, electrocuted instantly. What caused my death was mainly the fact that my phone was charging at the same time. My best friend witnessed my last breath while I was screaming her name on the video call. She even made a very touching TikTok video about it to express her sadness over this event that cost me my life. To you who are watching this video, never use your phone in your bath. It could happen to anyone.
I murdered my entire family for a cam girl. I am Grant Amato. At the time, I had a normal life in Florida with a close-knit family. Then, one day, I fell into an obsession with a Bulgarian cam girl named Sylvie. It started as a simple indulgence, but it spiraled out of control. I emptied my savings, family funds, everything, for virtual interactions with her. Of course, my family found out. They were furious, disappointed. They gave me an ultimatum: stop this madness or be cut off. And you know what? I chose Sylvie. I severed ties with my family, even stole money from my own brother to feed this virtual obsession. Yeah, you got it right. I was completely lost. The situation worsened. My family tried to bring me back to reason, but I was so immersed in this virtual life that I couldn't turn back. And one day, everything changed. My family was found murdered at home. They said I did it. Imagine being accused of killing your own family. It's the craziest thing that could happen, right? In the end, I was found guilty. My whole life turned upside down because of this unhealthy obsession. Today, I'm here in prison, wondering how I got to this point.
I burned my husband after he raped our 7-year-old daughter. My name is Tatanisha Hedman, and one evening when I finished work early, I wanted to surprise my family, and as I walked into the house and passed my daughter's bedroom door, I heard her crying in the background. When I opened the door, I discovered that my husband, Vincent Phillips, was raping her. My first thought was to take the gun and kill him, but that was far too kind a punishment for what he'd just done. So I waited until he was fast asleep before entering the room with a can of gasoline, poured it all around the bed, took a lighter, and lit the fire. Very quickly, the room was completely engulfed in flames, and then I fled. I was quickly arrested, and unluckily my husband didn't die, but was taken to hospital with serious burns. I was sentenced to 12 years in prison in 2012, but I don't regret what I did. I did what I thought was best to protect my daughter and avenge her. Some people think that what I did was perfectly justified and that I was right to do it, and other people think I'm a monster, and what do you think?
This is a scary story about Do Not Open. There was an 18-year-old girl named Mia who was in her first year at college. She lived alone in an apartment near her university. One night when she was doing the dishes, she got a call from her friend Pete. She picked it up and he said, "I'm bored, I want to hang out." Mia said, "Yeah, me too, come over." Pete then said he'll be over in 15 to 20 minutes. She then hung up and decided to take a shower. Mia was in the middle of shampooing her hair when she suddenly heard a loud banging on the door. She stuck her head out of the shower and said, "Come in, it's open." But a few minutes later, the banging on the door started again. She then stuck her head out of the shower again and said, "Come in, it's not locked." Just then, her phone started to ring and it was Peter. Mia said, "I'm in the shower, why don't you stop knocking and just come in?" Peter's voice sounded extremely scared and he said, "Do not open the door." Mia said, "Why not?" "I'm outside your apartment building," whispered Peter. "And I just saw a strange woman coming up the stairs to your apartment covered in blood and holding a knife. And she was smiling weirdly and didn't look human at all."
I glued the mouth and eyes of my 1-year-old daughter with super glue. My name is Johnny Lee Carter, and I was 29 years old in 2018 when I committed an unthinkable act to stop my daughter's crying, while I was supposed to take care of my little girl who was just 1 year old. While my wife was out shopping, she wouldn't stop crying, and I tried to calm her for a long time, but to no avail. She kept crying. Her screams became unbearable and drove me to a rage. Then I tried to strangle her, but she started screaming even more, and I was even less able to calm her down. That's when I saw a tube of glue next to me. I grabbed it, and without thinking, I put some on her eyes and mouth. Then I realized what I had done and fled. A few moments later, her mother returned, discovering the horror I had committed. She immediately called emergency services who were able to repair all the damage I had caused. And my daughter will have no lasting effects from what I did. A week later, I was arrested by the police more than 100 kilometers from our home where I had fled. What punishment do you think I deserve?
This is what it looks like crashing at different speeds, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
heartbreaking final request this girl made before she was brutally killed. It was 2008 and Eve Carson was 22 years old. She was living in North Carolina and was a student at the university. She was incredibly passionate about helping others and participated in many organisations, including a hunger relief organisation. In the early hours of the morning on March the 5th, 2008, things would take a very dark turn. Lawrence Lovett, aged 20, had an extensive criminal background. On the night in question, he rang one of his friends called Jason and asked him to drive him and his friend to Chapel Hill to rob someone. Jason actually declined this, so Lawrence and his friend Demario Atwater went on their way to find a victim. At around 3:30 a.m, Eve had actually been going to her car to get something. At this point, the pair decided to strike. They forced their way into her car and held her at gunpoint. They took her to some cash machines and forced her to take out money for them. She tried to reason with the men and just say, you've taken my money, now please just let me go. However, they showed no mercy and decided they had to kill her because she'd seen their faces. They drove her to a wooded area and, heartbreakingly, it seemed like Eve realised what was about to happen. Upsettingly, she asked the pair to pray with her. They then callously shot her 5 times. Locals in the area reported to police that they had heard gunshots. Eve's body was found shortly after, and it wasn't long before police started scouring CCTV. Police identified the killers and they were sentenced to life in prison. This is the disturbing case of Robert Moan that stunned Scotland. Robert Moan was born in Dundee. He reportedly had a difficult upbringing and was abused by his dad throughout his childhood. He was bullied and ultimately was expelled from school. He served in the army and reportedly turned to alcohol to cope with depression. On the 1st of November 1967, Robert was 19 years old. He'd been drinking in a pub that day and decided to take revenge on the school that had expelled him. He was dressed in uniform and armed himself with a shotgun as he entered 26-year-old Nanette Hansen's class. It was a class of 11 girls aged between 14 and 15. Nanette was pregnant with her first child at this time. He subjected the students and their teacher to a 1.5-hour ordeal. He R'd one girl and SA'd another before brave Nanette convinced him to let the girls go. However, before doing so, he made Nanette turn around and shot her in the back. She died on her way to hospital. After the murder, Robert was deemed insane in the High Court in Dundee and was ordered to be detained without limit at the state hospital. However, that would not be the end of Robert's crimes. In 1976, he broke out of Carstairs Hospital with fellow inmate and lover Thomas McCulloch. They had plotted the escape for ages, collecting weapons to help them do so. During their bid for freedom, they murdered another inmate and a male nurse and also killed a police officer before eventually being recaptured. Robert's partner in crime, Thomas, was released in 2013 and is believed to be living in Dundee now. Robert's in his 70s and remains in prison, and he is Scotland's longest-serving prisoner. For the outside world, these expectant parents had a picture-perfect life. What happened next would prove that that couldn't have been further from the truth. Joshua Hilberling was 23 years old. He'd been married to his wife Amber for around a year, and the pair lived in an apartment in Oklahoma. Now, Amber was 19 and the pair were known to have quite a volatile relationship and regularly get into arguments. Joshua's parents stated that Amber would abuse him throughout the relationship. He'd apparently even visited a domestic violence intervention service to seek help. Now, Joshua actually filed a protective order against Amber after an incident in which she hit him across the head with a lamp. It was so bad that he had to go to hospital and get stitches. Joshua reportedly wanted to leave Amber, but he felt trapped as she was 7 months pregnant with his child. The protective order was never finalised as the pair never turned up to court. On the 7th of June 2011, the pair had another one of their serious fights. This one, though, would be the last fight they would ever have. Shockingly, in the middle of a disagreement, Amber pushed Joshua out of their window of their 25th floor apartment. He fell to his death, and Amber was soon arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Amber's lawyers would argue that Joshua was the abuser in the relationship and that she pushed him in self-defense. Amber claimed that Joshua was kicked out of the US Air Force for substance abuse, and this is one factor that she said caused serious arguments between them. In court, though, a jury did find her guilty of second-degree murder and she got 25 years in prison. Amber gave birth to a baby boy and her family took over custody. On October the 26th, 2016, after Amber served 3 years in prison, she was found deceased in her cell. A coroner ruled that her death was a self-unaliving. Do you notice anything odd about this last photo of this girl alive? It was 2012 and Alicia Bromfield from Illinois was 21 years old. She was a student at Western Illinois University, just one semester away from graduating. She was studying forensic psychology and criminal justice and was 6 months pregnant. She'd already picked the name Ava for her unborn baby girl. Now, although the father of the baby wasn't around, she was preparing for single motherhood. Little did she know, neither her nor her unborn child would survive much longer. 36-year-old Brian Cooper was Alicia's boss at Home Depot. The two seemed fairly close and sometimes met outside of work and walked Brian's dog. There was never anything romantic between them though. Brian was actually very abusive to Alicia. He would call her derogatory names in front of members of staff and shockingly even customers. He was even witnessed throwing things at her, but she felt that she had to stay in the job. She knew she was soon about to be a mother, so she was worried about the financial implications of not having a job. Brian continued to bully Alicia and make her life miserable. He would purposely make her work extra hours just so he could spend extra time with her. She actually started to report this to management, but nothing was ever done. In August 2012, he started pressuring her to attend his sister's wedding with him. She didn't want to go, but he threatened to sack her if she didn't. Her mum was really concerned about Alicia being forced to go to this wedding. Alicia reassured her, however, that she was simply going as a friend and that they'd be back the next day. Alicia's mum was comforted by the fact that Brian told Alicia they were going to be staying at the same hotel as the rest of the wedding party. This was the Sand Bay Resort in Wisconsin. However, this was a lie. On the 17th of August, the pair drove 4 hours to the hotel, and when they got there, Alicia realised that they weren't staying in the same hotel as everyone else. They got into an argument about this, and the argument escalated when Brian made sexual advances to Alicia. She told her mum on the phone that she was really fed up with how he was acting and that she'd lost her patience with him. She told Brian that they would go to the wedding together, but they would not remain friends afterwards. They went to the wedding together and Brian got more and more drunk as the evening went on. Afterwards, they went back to the hotel and got into their separate beds for the evening. When Brian started harassing Alicia again, she again rejected him, and this time he launched a vicious attack. He dragged her to the ground and strangled her. She screamed out, "Think of the baby," but he didn't, and he killed her. He then AR'd her body as she lay deceased. The next morning, he showed up to a local petrol station and asked to use the phone. He rang police and admitted to intentionally killing her. He said, "I'm a good person besides what I did last night. Alicia's family is going to flip, everyone is going to flip." Police raced to the scene and arrested him. They found Alicia's body nude in the hotel room with just a blanket covering her. It was later discovered that Brian had been so obsessed with Alicia that he'd actually been recording her with spy cameras. He was ultimately convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and given 2 life sentences.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This one really is heartbreaking. I'm going to put a trigger warning on this straight away. It's a tough one to listen to. Nia Glassy was folded into a ball and placed into a tumble dryer on high heat for 30 minutes. She was just 3 years old. She practically became the poster child for child abuse in New Zealand back in 2007, but the tumble dryer wasn't what killed her. That she survived, and she went on to suffer horrific abuse at the hands of her mother's boyfriend, his brother and other family members before eventually passing away. Nia's mother, Lisa Cooker, was 35 at the time of Nia's death, and she was in a relationship with Wiramu Curtis, who was just 17. Nia had other siblings, but for some reason she was singled out, and she was practically used as a punch bag by Wiramu and his brother Michael. Other family members were often at the house, and they witnessed the abuse but did absolutely nothing. These 2 monsters would practice wrestling moves on Nia. She'd have chunks of wood dropped on her. She was often kicked, beaten, slapped and jumped on. She was held over a burning fire, flung against walls, spun on an outdoor clothes area until she was thrown off, and one of the other children in the house recalled how Wiramu had picked Nia up by her hips and neck, and once she reached the ceiling, he let go. The final blow came in July 2007 when Nia was violently kicked in the head. Despite clearly being injured and unconscious, Nia was left on the floor, and when her mother Lisa came home from work, she too didn't call an ambulance. She put Nia in the bath and then put her to bed. She then spent the night partying with her boyfriend and other family members while they celebrated a 21st birthday. By the time Nia was taken to hospital, it had been 36 hours since the fatal blow, and she couldn't survive her injuries. She did fight for another 13 days on life support, but she passed away on August 3rd, 2007. During Nia's hospitalisation, her mother Lisa was spotted partying in various clubs, and that just sickens me. During the investigation into Nia's death, practically all of the adults in that house tried to blame each other, but ultimately it was the testimonies of the other children that lived there that led to their arrests. Following a 4-week trial in November 2008, Nia's mother Lisa was found guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. She was actually paroled in 2015, but she was sent back to prison after breaking her release conditions. However, she has now since been released. 2 other family members were found guilty of child abuse and sentenced to jail time, but have 2 now been released. Wiramu Curtis and his brother Michael Curtis were both found guilty of Nia's murder, and they were both sentenced to life in prison. The presiding judge wept as she read out the sentences, and she offered counselling to all members of the jury. Singer-songwriter Maisie Rika actually wrote a song dedicated to Nia, and you can find it on YouTube, but be warned, you will need tissues.
This might be the most disturbing case in human history, and before I begin, you've been warned. On January 19th, 1996, the mutilated remains of Diao Aquing, who disappeared 9 days prior, were found across multiple locations in China. Her body had been dismembered into over 2,000 pieces. The case remains unsolved, and it's one of the most notorious crimes in Chinese history. On January 10th, 1996 in the evening, Diao and her college roommate were punished for the illegal use of an electric appliance. After a conflict with the dormitory management, she left the building and did not return. Diao was last seen alive wearing a red coat with a black lining. She was reported missing, but her family was not notified by the authorities until January 19th. The discovery of Diao's remains in the winter of January 19th was first reported by a sanitary worker. Initially, he thought it was pork, so he brought it home for food. And while preparing the meat for himself, 3 human fingers were found in it. The worker then reported the discovery to the police, and they confirmed they were human fingers. Human remains in plastic-wrapped packages were eventually discovered across 8 locations around the university, including at a stadium, entrance gate, hospital, and along roadsides. The police later confirmed that the scattered remains were of Diao's and informed her father to visit Nanjing. Between January 20th and 30th, Diao's head and clothes were found. More than 2,000 human remains were recovered. Diao's head and internal organs were boiled for several days. Crucial organs including the heart, liver, and spleen were never found. The forensics team was only able to identify the remains as belonging to a female through the analysis of body hair and muscle tissue. Relatives of Diao were able to identify her through a mole on her right cheek. A senior officer involved in the case described the killing as really cruel, which in my opinion is a nice way to put it. The officer also added that the pieces of flesh were dissected with high precision, only achieved by an individual with great understanding of anatomy. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or surgeon. Teachers and students then became the subject of investigation. 2 suspect profiles were brought up, including a single physical fit middle-aged male. However, the university department could not find any individuals that matched the characteristics of the profile. A major investigation was launched in the university and the areas around, but no major clues of the crime were found, and the case failed to make any progress. In 2016, Nanjing police told the family of Diao that the case is still under investigation. Okay, so let's talk about this case for a second. If the killer was never found and he had the skill to dissect somebody into 2,000 pieces and never get caught with it, don't you think he might be a serial killer? And if he was, how many more people do you think he murdered after Diao? The dedication and skill, and honestly the obsession to cut somebody into 2,000 pieces and not get caught with it is crazy. This person could be walking around the streets of China today doing the same things to other people that he did to Diao. The thought of that is absolutely disturbing, and may Diao rest in peace.
This is a bit of a different one for me. I was recently contacted by a mother whose son died in 2020 under suspicious circumstances. Angie Solomon contacted me and she asked me to cover her son's death. So I really do want to get this out to as many people as possible so that she can get some signatures on her petition to open an investigation into her son's death, because something doesn't seem right. So the last person to see Grant alive was his own father, Aaron Solomon. This is a man who is very well connected in Nashville, Tennessee, where they lived and where Grant died. He's a former radio host, TV host, news anchor, and he has a lot of connections very high up. He's also a man that's abused his family for years, Grant, his mother, and Grant's little sister, who he sexually abused for years from a very young age, even raping her at one point. Grant promised his little sister Gracie that once he turned 18, he would do everything he could, everything in his power to protect her and get her away from their father. Just after he turned 18 was when he was killed. So this is Angie with Grant, and she's asked me to cover this story just to get it out there and get as many details out there as possible, because something doesn't seem right, doesn't add up. There are so many little bits to this story when I've looked into it that just don't add up. They seem very suspicious, and there was never a proper investigation done into his death. So she has a petition on her page. If you go onto her profile, I will tag her. On her link tree, there is a petition, and she needs 300,000 signatures. She's so close. She's got over 200,000, and she needs an investigation opening into her son's death. So I'll take you back to the day that he died. So it was July 20th, 2020, and Grant had recently had COVID. He'd also been diagnosed with asthma and wasn't feeling 100% himself. Grant was a baseball player, and on this day, his dad Aaron had scheduled a private baseball session for them at a local sports club, despite the fact that Aaron had just had COVID, just been diagnosed with asthma, and wasn't feeling himself. So Aaron has given multiple different stories about what happened that morning, but they basically all end with Grant ending up underneath his truck, pinned underneath his truck, and this is what killed him, according to Aaron. So in one version of events, Aaron says that he was in his own car checking work emails when he heard a loud bang. He looked up to see Grant's truck in the ditch at the end of the parking lot, and Grant was trapped underneath. Another version is that Aaron saw Grant stood behind his truck when it started rolling backwards, dragging him underneath and pinning him underneath his truck inside the ditch. Aaron called 911 and told them what had happened, but to me it sounds like he's talking to someone else while he's on the phone to 911, and he claimed that 3 men were also there with him. These 3 men were never found. He never really mentioned them again. They were never tracked down for an interview or anything like that by police. So that doesn't sound right to me.
Somehow it drug him underneath it. Yes, my son is under it. I'm trying to call 911.
Okay, what's your name?
Oh my God. My name is Aaron Solomon.
And you said
oh
you're
my God.
at 1357 South Water Avenue, right?
Yes.
How old
yes.
is the male?
He's 18. He just turned 18 a couple weeks, about a month ago. It's my son. Oh my God. Oh my God, this is not good.
Is he awake and
Oh, please hurry.
to you?
I don't think so. He's not alert, right? No, he's out. And he's trapped. I got 3 guys here, and he's trapped under the truck.
Okay.
Oh my God.
I understand, sir. Stay on the phone with me while we get somebody out there. What's your name?
Aaron Solomon.
Something about that phone call to me just doesn't seem genuine. If that was one of my children trapped under a truck, unresponsive, I would be frantic, I'd be panicking. He's very calm, almost like he's rehearsed what he's going to say, whether he's played out that day in his head a few times and he knew exactly what he was going to say to 911, I'm not sure. But to also not be anywhere near his son at that point, he was stood up at the top of the parking lot where I'm guessing his car was. He wasn't even down there where Grant's truck was. You'd be on the floor trying to speak to your son, surely, if that was your son trapped under there. This is where it gets really, really weird. So there wasn't a scratch on Grant's body. To say that he'd been knocked down by his car, he'd been dragged down the parking lot into a ditch, there wasn't a scratch. The hospital said that there was a laceration to the back of his head and that he died from blunt force trauma. And on looking at Grant's belongings in his truck, there was a baseball bat missing. So he had a few large baseball bats, he had 2 baseball gloves, and his small aluminium baseball bat was nowhere to be found, and it's never been found. Another thing that's really weird is that Aaron said to Gracie after Grant's death that nothing would happen to his truck, he wouldn't sell it. He drove around in it for a few months and then claimed that it was totaled in the accident and claimed the insurance money. So Angie actually managed to track down the truck in Florida and she bought it back. And it's really, really weird. There was blood splatter inside the vehicle. It was also underneath the truck, but how it got inside the vehicle, if he was killed by getting knocked down outside his truck, I have no idea. And when she got the black box looked at, it gets even weirder. So the black box in Grant's truck shows that in the last 3 seconds that the ignition was on, there was somebody sat in the driver's seat, the accelerator was pushed down, the steering wheel was turned sharply to the right, and then the truck was put in park and the ignition was turned off. Now that can't have been Grant because he was supposedly underneath the truck. Also, according to a witness at the scene, Aaron was seen speaking to police, I'm guessing giving a statement, and then the police received a phone call, and shortly after that phone call, the police left and just took Aaron's word and his version of events for what happened. There was no proper investigation done whatsoever. Even just looking at the scene here, it looks like that truck's been driven into that ditch. It doesn't look like it's rolled the other way. I mean, this piece of grass, supposedly Grant was dragged over this by his truck. Would that not all be flattened down if a person had been dragged over it? It just, nothing adds up with this story. None of the details make sense. Aaron's story doesn't make sense. And if it was my son, I have 3 sons myself, and if this was one of them, I would be doing exactly what Angie is doing because she deserves justice, and so does Grant. So I will tag her, as I've said. Please go to her profile. She's got her petition in her link tree, and I hope to God that an investigation gets opened because she deserves justice for her son.